to know that one of the reasons why I'm here is I think I need to explain to you why I voted for NDAA. That's one of those issues that has been part of the controversy today.
It's perhaps a little unfair for me to ask you to get into the head of your colleagues, Senator Lee, but there were only 7 of you who voted against this. 93 senators voted in favor of this. What's in their heads? Don't they see the profound violation of the Constitution? Don't they see the profound opportunity for the abuse that you just characterized to be used by some president in the future?
Governor Romney, as president, would you have signed the National Defense Act as written?
Yes, I would have, and I do believe that it's appropriate. I recognize that when you're in a setting when there are enemy combatants, and some of them on our own soil, that could possibly be abused. There are a lot of things I think this president does wrong, lots of them. But I don't think he's going to abuse this power, and I know that if I were president, I would not abuse this power.
The President of the United States said in his press release that this bill gives the authority to detain U.S. citizens. He just was not going to use it.
The issue at hand was indefinite detention. When President Obama listed his authorities this year, he listed that as one of his powers, but he refused to put any limitations.
Does the United States government, through the military or any other agency, have the authority to arrest Americans and lock them up without a trial, without a judge, without charges?
It claims that authority. It should not have that authority, and that's why I was an original co-sponsor of the Feinstein Amendment. It would have made that point clear. And that's another reason why I voted against the final bill when it came up for a final vote, is because these provisions remained in there that appeared to extend that authority. That is, the authority indefinitely to detain U.S. citizens without trial, and I'm strongly against that.
And I don't care whatever has been said around you. Those are what the words say. I ask you to read the words.
I'm Chris Ann Hall, and I'm a constitutional attorney. I'm here to talk to you today about the National Defense Authorization Act.
But within that act, there were 2 provisions that have become somewhat controversial.
There's been a lot of controversy about sections 1021, 1022, and that's because of the great ambiguity in this language.
The Senate added 2 other provisions, the so-called 1021 and 1022. But in each of those, they were talking about foreign terrorism. That's the topic of it.
Section 1021 reads the affirmation of authority of the armed forces of the United States to detain covered persons pursuant to the authorization for use of military force. The very important phrase in that title is covered persons. Section B of Section 1021 then helps us understand what a covered person is. This is one of the areas of ambiguity and one of the areas where the argument in favor of this bill falls apart. The phrase after the comma, the phrase after the words coalition partners, are what really should draw concern for us, because it continues by saying, including any person who has committed a belligerent act or has directly supported such hostilities in aid of such enemy forces. These words are not defined anywhere in this act. These words are open, they are ambiguous, and they leave a great big hole for interpretation. The words any person, the words belligerent act, and hostilities. Now we have opened the definition of covered persons to any person who commits a belligerent act or a hostility. Section C of this provision deals with the authority invested in this section. It reads, disposition under the law of war. The disposition of a person under the law of war as described in Section A, which is our covered persons, may include the following: detention under the law of war without trial until the end of the hostilities, authorized by the authorization for use of military force. Now here is where we have the indefinite detention provision. You are now allowed to detain any person who has engaged in a belligerent act or hostility without trial until the end of such hostility. Section 3 of this same subsection C continues by saying that the authority now invested allows for the transfer for trial of these detained people to an alternative court or competent tribunal having lawful jurisdiction. That means that we can transfer them outside the United States if they're detained here in the United States. That means they don't have to be prosecuted in a military court. As a matter of fact, the words competent tribunal are a very common phrase when referring to UN international courts. And then we can transport them anywhere to be tried in any court, whether foreign or domestic. At this time, I think it's really important to remind ourselves what our own Declaration of Independence says. For depriving us, in many cases, of the benefit of a trial by jury, for transporting us beyond the seas to be tried for pretended offenses.
And I don't care whatever has been said around you. Those are what the words say. I ask you to read the words. Same thing Alan West told the Tea Party in Florida. Read the words. This is about foreign terrorists, and it does not allow you to use any of these powers against an American citizen. So,
there have been no exclusions of U.S. citizens. There have been no mention of any exclusion of U.S. citizens. And it is not limited to Al-Qaeda or Taliban, as we've seen. It is only limited to any person who has committed a belligerent act or a hostility against the United States or coalition forces or have aided such hostilities.
In A4, another one that has got a lot of publicity, the President may waive requirements of this paragraph if the President submits to Congress a certification in writing that such a waiver is in the national security interests of the United States. That's in foreign terrorism.
What that paragraph does is gives the President of the United States the ability to waive and alter the definition of a covered person without any limitation whatsoever. The original bill submitted said, the Secretary of Defense may, in consultation with the Secretary of State and the Director of National Intelligence, waive the requirement of paragraph 1. If the Secretary submits to Congress a certification in writing that such a waiver is in the national security interests of the United States. A waiver in the original bill submitted had to be given in consultation of 3 people. 3 people had to come to the conclusion that a waiver was necessary for the national security interests of the United States. But the bill passed says the President may waive the requirement from the hands of 3 to the hands of 1. Now, another thing that we really have to be aware of, this says the President may waive the requirement of paragraph 1 if the President submits to Congress a certification in writing that such a waiver is in the national security interests of the United States. Nothing in paragraph 4 requires a vote of Congress, requires an approval of Congress, requires any type of congressional oversight whatsoever. All it requires is something in writing from the President that this is necessary, and then it's done. And Thomas Jefferson wrote in our Declaration of Independence as a grievance against George III for detaining our founders. He said, for depriving us in many cases of the benefit of the trial of jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses. Chief Justice William Rehnquist said in 1979, the founders of our nation considered the right of trial by jury an important bulwark against tyranny and corruption, a safeguard too precious to be left to the whim of the sovereign. I have never heard a better description of sections 1021 and 1022, but to leave our fundamental rights at the whim of a sovereign. William Pitt said, "Necessity is the plea for every infringement of human freedom. It is the argument of tyrants. It is the creed of slaves."
When we take an oath to the U.S. Constitution, to uphold it, to support it, to protect it, to defend it, we're doing more than simply agreeing to do whatever the courts will tolerate. We're taking an oath to the principles embodied in this 224-year-old document that has fostered the greatest civilization the world has ever known.
I have two words for you: predator drones. You will never see it coming. You think I'm joking?